It's time for the Rose Chat Podcast, a podcast dedicated to celebrating the world's most beloved flower, the rose. Join award-winning gardeners Chris VanCleave and Teresa Byington as they chat with rose lovers and experts from around the globe. With each episode, you'll gain valuable knowledge and insights to achieve the rose garden you've always dreamed of. Listen now as we explore the world of roses.
Hey Rose friends, I am so excited to have my good friend and a great Rosarian with me today, Suzanne Gilbert. Suzanne has recently moved from her dream rose garden and home of 34 years to a new home where she's created a new rose garden. And today we're going to hear what this experience has been like. Now, I've been in my garden for 37 years, and I often think about what it would be like to design another one. Actually, it sounds just super fun. Hey, Suzanne, welcome to Rose Chat.
Hey, Teresa. You and I'm so glad to be here, and thank you for giving me an opportunity to talk to everyone today.
Well, I've been so excited for our chat and just the opportunity to catch up because we haven't talked in a while.
Right. So lots has happened since we talked the last time.
It certainly has. Well, let's go back a little bit and let's start on how you became interested in roses.
Well, I began growing roses when I was a young girl, probably about 9 or 10 in Baltimore, Maryland. I had gone to Longwood Gardens with my family, and I came home with 3 roses, Peace and Chrysler, Imperial, and Tropicana. And then I gardened in Baltimore for a while. Our family moved around quite a bit. And then I got more rose gardening information during a trip to England with my husband. Actually, it was for our 10th wedding anniversary. We visited his aunts who lived in Bournemouth, and they were all great gardeners. And roses were important in their gardens. So I was very inspired by that. Then after a move to Houston, I became really interested in roses again. And I found out pretty quickly that Houston can be a challenging place to grow roses if you don't do the right thing. So I found the Houston Rose Society, and I started growing roses successfully. And I read the Houston Rose Society newsletter every month, the Rosette. And I got lots of mentoring from the Consulting Rosarians in the Houston Rose Society. And that all kind of led me to where I am today.
Well, I am so glad that you had the experience in England because, as you know, I get to spend time there, and, roses are a focus and they are so wonderful there. It would be very hard not to fall in love with roses while you're in England during rose season, for sure. They're so beautiful there. So I totally agree with whether you join a local group or a national organization, there's just so many ways that you can learn and serve. And it's so fun to meet others who love what you love. And that's that spark, and it just ignites and just really brings your hobby to another level, I think.
Oh, yes, you're exactly right, Teresa. I totally agree.
Now, let's talk a little bit about all the ways that you've served. You jumped right into the Houston Rose Society, and I know that they mentored you, but you have served in many ways. So let's talk a little bit about those things that you've done.
Okay. Well, when, I taught school for many years. And so when I always read the Rosettes and I went occasionally to the meetings when I was teaching. But then after I retired, I decided to become a Consulting Rosarian. And so in 2012, I took the classes and I became a Consulting Rosarian. And then in 2022, I was awarded the American Rose Society title of Master Rosarian. I've served on the board of the Houston Rose Society as publicity chairperson. And I tell you what, that was a job I really liked because I got acquainted with the who's who of growing everything in Houston. So I got to meet a lot of really nice, fun people through that. And then I became president. And the year that I became president was the year of COVID. And I was president for 3 years. And that was really a challenge because we didn't meet for a while and we had virtual meetings. And actually, that's a whole nother story. But anyway, I did serve as president of the HRS for 3 years. And now I'm currently on the board as past president. I'm also serving as secretary for the South Central District of the American Rose Society. And then in September at the American Rose Society Convention in Rhode Island, I'm going to be installed as South Central District Director. And the South Central District of the American Rose Society consists of the local rose societies in Texas and Oklahoma and the western part of Arkansas. And I'm really looking forward to doing this. I'm looking forward to meeting Rosarians in different rose societies and meeting with them. The South Central District will be having a convention in Tulsa this year at the end of October, and I'll be going for that. So it'll be a new chapter and be exciting. And also in 2023, I had the opportunity to write a series of articles for the American Rose magazine for beginning gardeners. And that was something I really enjoyed doing. But actually, one of the things I like best about being a consulting Rosarian is having the opportunity to speak to people in the community about how to grow their best roses. I think a lot of times people in Houston get they try a little bit and they don't have a lot of success, and there's a lot of things that they can do to really grow excellent roses here. And so over the years, I've given many presentations to master gardeners, lots of garden clubs, and community groups such as the Daughters of the American Revolution. So I really do like giving those garden talks.
It's so fun to be, I totally agree. It's so fun to get that up close and personal with other people who are so eager to learn and to know about roses. And when you love them like we do, it's just a real gift to be able to do that. Now, tell us a little bit about the Houston Rose Society. Now, when you think of Rose Society, you may be thinking 10 people, 12 people, 20 people. The Houston Rose Society is huge, right?
Yes, it is one of the largest rose societies in the nation. It encompasses a large area of Southeast Texas. Houston is one of the largest cities in the United States. So we have members of the Houston Rose Society that live in Galveston and League City and the Houston metropolitan area. And then we go out west toward Katy, Texas, and Columbus, and north toward the Woodlands, and east toward Kingwood. And we have lots of members in Louisiana. It is a very large rose society. I wish I could remember the exact number of members from our board meeting last week, but it's definitely way over 200 members. So it is a very large organization. I feel fortunate to have been a part of it all these years.
Oh, it is a thriving organization. I get their newsletter too and know many of the members, and it is a wonderful, wonderful, exciting group. Now let's go back and talk a little bit about growing roses in Houston. There's some challenges there.
Yes, there are. Well, I guess the size of the Houston Rose Society says something about that you can successfully grow roses in Houston. You just have to know what to do. So where I live in Houston, it's zone 9B. We used to be 9A, but they changed it last year. So now it's 9B. I live north of Houston in a small community, bedroom community called Klein, Texas. And Klein was established way about 150 years ago. By the Lutherans, and they built schools, buildings, and so it's been a nice place to live. So that's where I live in Houston, but people that live in Galveston are Zone 10. We also have people that are north of us in Conroe and Huntsville, and they would probably be like Zone 8A, 8B, something like that.
Well, one of the things that I think about when I think of Houston is I'm not sure how you guys deal with these storms that come your way, but then I'm not sure that you would like all the snow that comes our way. So every place has its good points and bad.
Very true, Teresa, very true. Well, one of the nice things about growing roses in Houston is that you have two major bloom times a year. They bloom in the spring, usually mid to late April. And then if they have a grooming, your roses have a grooming in the fall, you'll get a very nice fall bloom. And to be honest with you, sometimes we get roses at Thanksgiving, Christmas, and one year at the Houston Rose Society meeting in January, somebody brought a huge bouquet of roses that were blooming in their garden. So it is a long season for growing roses. The winter temperatures here can be very nice. They can be in the 50s and 60s in the daytime, bright sunshine. So I always think, gosh, if people knew how nice it was in the winter, they'd all want to move here, except they'd all move home when they got to the summer. But our climate here is classified as a subtropical climate. Lots of plants and trees thrive here, and roses grow very well here. But like I said previously, you have to have the correct growing conditions. Mm-hmm. Now, there are some cons to living in Houston. In the recent years, we've had a couple of major droughts in the summer. That summertime ridge of high pressure can sit here for days or weeks, and it can cause the temperatures to be 95 degrees plus. Matter of fact, the last couple days in Houston, it's been 100 plus. The weathermen are teasing us and saying that possibly we're going to get a break this weekend. I hope they're right. But Teresa, in the years that I've lived in Houston, we've gone through 3 hurricanes, an assortment of tropical storms. And a lot of times when I think of my years in Houston, I kind of think about which hurricane it was. Was it Ike? Was it Harvey? Was it Beryl? But that's how I kind of time things sometimes when I think of my garden. Also, in recent winters, we've had temperatures as cold as you all get, like in the teens for short periods of time. But then instead of staying in the low teens, the temperatures rebound back into the 60s. So usually the cold snaps are brief, but those can be very damaging to our roses, particularly the kind of cold snap, which we call a blue norther, where it's 70 at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and that evening by 8 o'clock, the fronts come through and it's really cold. It's in the 20s. So that can be damaging for roses. And that's one of the things that we talk about with our members, how to deal with those cold snaps.
Well, we are doing some of the same things, a little bit different angle, but we get really, really cold. And then we've been warming up in odd times throughout the winter, then getting really cold again. So it's kind of the same thing, which is devastating, especially to our climbers. I've had in the last 5 years, 2 years where my big, beautiful climbers have died back to the ground. Now, I didn't lose them completely, but it takes a whole nother year for them to reach those epic proportions. So it's big disappointment, but it's just a funny warm up and then back to the cold. And that's the thing that has been difficult for us. And we've just had used to, it got cold, it stayed cold, and you dealt with the cold by mulching and different things. But we've had those odd warm ups and then back to cold.
Well, and Teresa, one thing too that we've noticed is sometimes when you have that cold snap with the warm up, it looks like in the spring you prune the rose back. It looks like it's going to be fine. It looks like it's going to grow and be fine. And then it gets to the heat of the summer, and the canes were damaged and the plant dies. So that's what we've been seeing with some roses, not all.
Well, we all have something to endure. That makes it interesting, don't you think?
Definitely.
It does. Now let's get to the beautiful gardens. You've got to take us back to your previous garden. It was a lovely, lovely garden. So tell us a little bit about your previous garden.
Okay. Well, my previous garden was how I always categorize it as a small suburban garden. It was about 240 square feet. At one point in time, I grew about 100 roses. I had hybrid teas, floribundas, and climbers. But the story starts a little bit before that, because we moved into the house in the early 90s. It was my first attempt at gardening and gardening with roses in Houston. And so I was so delighted to have a space to garden in that I bought all kinds of roses and all kinds of plants, and I just stuck them in everywhere. And it was a huge overgrown mess. And the problem was that I had no garden plan. And so basically, since I had no garden plan, I had planned to fail. But those hurricanes, they do save you sometimes. And in 2008, Hurricane Ike came up through I-45 through the center of Houston, and he spawned mini tornadoes, and he pushed over 2 large pine trees in our backyard. Fortunately, they did not land on the house. They landed on the fence. And at that point in time, my husband and I decided that it was time for an updated garden. And we hired a landscaper who was going to give me a plan. And the garden became a reality. So after the pine trees and some other trees were removed from the garden, which was facing southeast, received full sun all day long. It was I would say a rather formal garden. It had a large bed for roses as the centerpiece, and it was a raised bed which was approximately 12 inches tall. It was built of pavers, and I normally had about 15 hybrid teas and floribundas in that bed, and they were stepped down, meaning I had the big ones in the back, and then we had medium-sized ones, and the small ones were in the front. And some of the ones I grew were Mr. Lincoln and Cinco de Mayo and Savannah, Dame Decor, the little ones, Sunglow and Conundrum. And then, so that was my kind of centerpiece bed. And then we had 2 other raised beds, and those were built with landscape timbers. And I only put hybrid teas in those. So things like Lasting Love, Buxom Beauty, St. Patrick, Gemini. I had a small herb garden that was also built of landscape timbers. And then at the back of the garden, on the pillars where the fence was, I had 3 large climbing roses, Buff Beauty, Cornelia, and Will Scarlet. And they lived there for a long time, 20 plus years. Wow. Then I had more climbers. I had all kinds of roses. I had more climbers on the side. I had Don Juan, Climbing Pinky, and Graham Thomas. And we had a raised deck that was constructed with stone pavers. We had there were two disappearing fountains that were installed in the garden. So it was really a lovely garden. We really did enjoy the garden. The rose garden backed up to a street, which was a very busy street twice a day because of school traffic. So we planted Japanese yews and cherry laurels at the very back to buffer the noise and give us some privacy. There were walkways in the garden which were laid with pavers and crushed granite and flagstones. And outside the garden on the driveway bed, I had a small bed of old garden roses and shrub roses, and Gay Hammond grew there, and Archduke Charles and Maggie. So basically in my previous garden, the roses were the centerpiece.
And I've seen pictures, it was beautiful. But then you decided to have a new house and you had to leave that garden. Was it hard to leave?
Yes, it was hard to leave just because we had put so much work and effort into our garden. But in 2021, my husband and I decided that we wanted to look for a new house. We love the garden, but we needed a house with a different configuration. We both like to cook, and the kitchen in our former house was a galley kitchen. It was very small. There wasn't a lot of room to entertain friends, and 10 to 15 people in the kitchen gets a little tight. So we decided to look for a new house, and one of the criteria was to get a larger kitchen with more of an open family room design plan. Of course, I wanted a backyard or some kind of a yard to continue my rose and gardening hobby. And then at that point in time, my husband decided that he wanted a pool. So there were lots of things going on. We did find a house in December of 2021 that fit that criteria, and we moved in March of 2022. But I was sad to leave my other garden. It had so many roses and so many features that I really loved. But I was also looking forward to renovating and creating a new garden using a lot of what I learned in the past years of growing roses.
Oh, I'm sure that's true. Just as a creative person, I think about that all the time. I'm always looking for ways in my garden, which is a large garden that has a lot of very distinct rooms in it, and looking for ways to freshen it and use your creative, instincts and to do new things. But when I started really implementing some new design ideas, I had one major goal in mind, and that was, and I think you kind of spoke to that earlier, your first garden, was to be more diligent about plant placement, in particular, giving plants enough space. And that's something we plant lovers are just really bad at. So even in the space that I'm still in, you just want to, get your hands in there and design and do some new things. So I bet this was a lot of fun.
Yes, it was. There were some stressful moments, but sometimes things don't always work out like you think they're going to. But yes, it has been fun. It's still a work in progress. The people who lived in the house before us took excellent care of the house. They took excellent care of the property. They maintained the landscape very nicely, but it wasn't a garden. So when we moved in, our goals were to renovate the existing landscape, Teresa, front and back, so that it reflected more of our tastes. Mm-hmm. And I wanted, I like a real garden and not just a landscape. But it is good to have a plan, though.
It is. Now, I've loved all the things you've told me about the new location in regard to wildlife and such. So can you describe that to our friends?
Sure. Interestingly enough, the house that we live in, our new house, the orientation of the garden is also southeast. So That was good. That was a good thing. But many things are very different. The garden is about the same size as the other one. It's a small suburban garden, but it does not back up to a busy street. It backs up to a green space that belongs to and is maintained by our homeowners association. And the green space has a long, narrow lake down the center of it. And the little lake, we call it the little lake. The little lake is really a retention pond, because when we get our torrential storms in Houston, the water can just come up very quickly. So that little lake or retention pond carries the water away and keeps houses from being flooded. Mm-hmm. But there are grassy slopes that go down to the lake. It has 4 fountains that run throughout the day, so it's very pretty and restful. The green space has many trees that are left to grow naturally. The homeowners association does not want you to touch any of them. They want it just to be left as it is. One of the things we've noticed since we've lived here, the little long lake is a highway for all kinds of creatures. The ducks swim in the little lake. They fly the length of it several times a day. They rest among the trees. They've even made their way into our garden to nest. They've even made their way into the pool to swim. But there's little fish in the pond. We hear bullfrogs at night. Sometimes we can hear them when we're trying to go to sleep. Coyotes and skunks have also been spotted in the greenway. Right now, because it's so hot, there's swarms of dragonflies hovering over the water. And our garden has a tall black wrought iron fence at the back of it. So we're able to see this action going on throughout the day. And then there is a garden gate, which also provides access to the green space. And outside the garden, the former owners, I have a small garden. It's actually on the homeowners association property, but I think they meant it to be a butterfly garden. It has cannas, esperanzas, salvias, and obedient plants. And so I haven't done a lot with that yet, but I do have some plans for it. It's gonna stay pretty much like it is.
Mm-hmm. So this is all very different from your space before. So has that changed the way you're gardening?
Oh, definitely. Because, like I said, in our other house, that huge rose bed was the centerpiece of the garden. But now we have a pool that's the centerpiece of the garden. So the garden needs to frame the pool and the large outdoor patio. So when we moved in, I as much as I loved my former garden, I knew I couldn't do a repeat of it. So I had to kind of change my mind about what I wanted to do. And one of the things I noticed right away, even though it's the same orientation, the sun was different. And there's lots of sun all day in our back garden, but the trees in the green space provide shade during some parts of the times of the day. We also have along the fence that adjoins our neighbor's property, a tall privacy hedge, and we call this the green wall. And it's basically Savannah hollies, and I don't know if you can grow those in Indiana, but Savannah hollies and ligustrums, and they've grown very tall, and those overshadow the garden at certain times of the day. But the wall is very lovely, and it does add a nice characteristic to the garden. And also, as I noticed as we lived in our home for the first year, because of the trees, because of the some of the trees being deciduous, the amount of sun we got changed drastically with the course of the seasons. So my garden vision kind of switched from an all rose garden to a more eclectic garden with roses.
That would be more like my garden. I have a lot of roses. It's heavy on roses, but I love everything.
Me too. So when we moved in March of 2022, we hired a landscaper and we started making plans. The very first thing we did in the backyard, where by the pool, is we removed several large yaupon shrubs. And yaupons are native to Texas, I believe. They're used in a lot of landscape design. They're kind of a boxwood substitute. And so we removed those large yaupon shrubs. We took down a stacked stone wall that bordered one side of the pool. And in place of that, we had stonemasons that constructed a long raised bed of Austin white limestone. So this bed, Teresa, is about 30 feet long. It's about 5 feet deep and 18 inches high. So it's behind the pool toward the back of the garden. And it creates a kind of another focal point beside the pool. They also built for me 3 smaller raised beds, which were about 12 inches high, and these are rectangular. They were off the patio. And so all of these new beds, we filled them with quality rose soil. And originally in the back garden, there was no walkway to the garden gate. So a walkway was installed with black star, it's called black star gravel, and large square stepping stones were sunk down into the gravel. And the former owners had flower beds along the fence. We kept these, but we expanded them and lined them with an edging material to keep the grass out.
Smart.
And we didn't totally remove the soil in those beds, but we enriched it with new rose soil, compost, and expanded shale. And every time I get ready to plant something or do something in those beds, I add more organic products. We also purchased 2 single raised planters for my herbs. And there's 2 small areas of grass for the benefit of our German Shepherd. Let's see. I was going to tell you about this too. The owners had created a bed by the house, which was close to the pool. It was kind of by the side entrance to the garden. And it's a fairly large bed, but the heat from the pool deck, the reflection of the heat from the pool deck, make it difficult to grow anything in the ground there. I tried initially when we moved in to put a few roses there, and they just cooked. It was way too hot. So our landscape designer suggested about creating a pot garden. So we installed a weed block. They put down that black star gravel again. And now I have 9 pots of different sizes in that pot garden. We also have a small oriental recirculating fountain at the back. And in the pots in the pot garden, I have yuccas, I have mangaves, and mangaves are a cross between a manfreda, which is a succulent that grows in the Southwest, and also agaves. And they're very heat tolerant. They have gorgeous colors, and you don't need to water them very much, and they love the heat. And I also have some aloes in there. So I was really happy with our landscape designer for suggesting that, because it's the perfect fit for that spot.
Yeah, they can take the heat and be very water wise for sure.
Definitely. Definitely.
So now you're putting together, you've got all these wonderful enriched raised beds. So what roses did you plant?
Well, in the large white limestone bed, I brought two true passion roses from my former garden. These were growing in pots, and the true passion roses are roses from the True Bloom collection, and these were hybridized by Ping Lam.
Mm-hmm.
And these roses are extremely disease resistant, and I really wanted to try them in the ground and see how they did. And they've performed very well. They love the heat. Almost no black spot. I don't see a lot of some pests, but not a lot. So I have two of those roses, which are orange red. One of the things I did in that bed is there are some roses that I really wanted to try, and I had always loved the photos of Plum Perfect. So I have two Plum Perfect roses. Those are Floribundas. Those are mauve, or purpley mauve, and they're very disease resistant. I've had no issues with them at all. I also have two South Africas, and South Africas are a grandiflora. They're a deep yellowy, kind of yellowy orange, and they're disease resistant. To me, they seem to love the heat. Both of these roses have been blooming all summer long, in spite of the hurricane, in spite of the heat. They just keep going. I also have in the very back of the bed some three true friendship roses. These are pink, and those were also part of the True Bloom collection, which was hybridized by Ping Lam. And because I had done some talks about Ping's roses and things like that, I wanted to try these and see how they really perform in a garden situation. And so far, I've been very pleased.
We've not been able to get them readily here. I did see some this year. I haven't tried them yet in my garden, but I do have Plum Perfect, and it has been just about perfect.
So yes, so that's excellent. You know, that's the kind of thing I'm looking for in my new garden. Now, in the beds that were amended, that are along the black wrought iron fence, I have one Dick Clark rose. It's a grandiflora, and this was if you don't know, Dick Clark is a red blend. It's a beautiful rose. I was at one of my favorite nurseries, and it was sitting there, and it was a real impulse purchase. It wasn't on my plan, but I bought it anyway, and it's done very well. It does get a little bit of black spot, but I think it's going to be okay. I think it's going to be a keeper. In that the beds by the wrought iron fence, I have three of the Pretty Polly roses. Two are the Pretty Polly pinks, and one is the Pretty Polly lavender. And these are polyanthus. They're very disease resistant. This year, this is the second year I've had them. They haven't been out of bloom. They're in continual bloom. And the reason I got these again is because I wanted to try them in my garden. And also because the gentleman who hybridized these, Dr. David Slezak, has spoken to the Houston Rose Society, and also he's a member. So I just wanted to see how they worked. And then also in those beds, I repeated the Plum Perfect in the South Africa again. Oh, and interestingly, Teresa, enough about the Plum Perfect in the South Africas. Two of the South Africas are grafted onto rootstock. The other ones are on their own root, and the same with the South Africas. Two are on root, two are on rootstock, and It doesn't seem to matter. They've all done well.
That's excellent news. That is excellent news. So we really love those en route here, especially when we get those cold winters and you get dieback and you know you're going to have your rose still. So
Right.
love that.
Definitely. Now, outside the garden gate, facing the little lake, I have 2 Savannah roses. These are hybrid teas. They're orange pink, extremely disease resistant. And the reason I selected those is because I wanted them to be to really make a pretty entrance to the garden. And I'm allowing them to get very tall. So right now they're probably 4.5, 5 feet tall, and they're on their own roots. They're thriving. They're really doing well. So Savannah's always been one of my very favorite roses. Now, in the little rectangular beds, white limestone beds by the patio, I have some drift roses. Those are pink. Those are a single petal drift, and they spill over the sides of the bed. They're very disease resistant. We have had I've noticed a little bit of spider mite damage, but they seem to bounce back from it really quickly. I also have we call it your rose, the 3 petite peach roses, and those are brand new this year. And they've been doing very well in our Texas heat. They're very disease resistant. I think the color fades a little bit in the heat, but I bet when it gets cooler, they're going to really, the colors are really going to pop again. A lot of roses fade here in the Houston heat. I have a mini flora in those beds that I really like. It's called Contrary Mary, and she's if she's anything, she's that. She does get a little bit of black spot. In my former garden, she lived in a pot, and I loved it because of the color, the shape of the blooms, but she just kind of limped along in the pot. And so when I put her in a bed with, not in a pot, her own soil, she just exploded, and she's grown to twice the size. She's almost never out of bloom. She does get a little bit of black spot, but she's doing very well in that spot. I also have in those beds Conundrum. It's a mini flora. It was hybridized by Robbie Tucker, who was also a Houston Rose Society member. And I had this rose in my other garden. I've always enjoyed it. Does get a little bit of black spot. And in my other garden, it took it a while to get going, and it's doing the same thing here. I think it will be fine. I have another mini flora. It's called Sun Glow, and it's medium yellow. It loves the heat. And this rose actually died in my former garden. I have a good friend that lives in Daphne, Alabama, Teresa, and she has one, and she rooted hers for me. So I was able to get it back. And then I have several other mini floras. They haven't been my biggest successes because they have issues with black spot. They probably need to be on a spray schedule, but they're beautiful when they're blooming. So I'm just kind of waiting to see what's going to happen with those, possibly if I need to move them to another spot. I do have no climbers on the back fence, but I do have 3 climbers that are on freestanding pillars in the small beds. And one is a Night of Magic. This is a large flowered climber. It has deep red blooms with yellow centers. It's very vigorous, and it was hybridized by Dave Bang, and it's really a lovely rose. I also have Sally Holmes, And Sally Holmes is a shrub rose, but she's really vigorous, and she makes a great climber. She's never out of bloom, so she's been a good rose. I also have Jean La Joie. It's a climbing miniature. She's beautiful, delicate pink blooms, and I think if she could be on the roof, she probably would be. So you have one more large climber, and of course that's Peggy Martin. You probably can't live in Houston without growing a Peggy Martin, but actually the reason I chose it is I get a lot of questions about how to grow this rose, and since I didn't have one, I thought putting it in my new garden would be a good way to help answer people's questions about it. So she's still young. She's still just growing. She hasn't even been through one bloom cycle yet.
Oh, she will grow, and she will grow big. Right now, I'm looking out at one of mine. I have several, and they do pretty well here. And it just looks like looks like a huge octopus of growth. She has thrown out canes everywhere. I'm going to have to pick a day, get on a ladder, and control it so she's beautiful next year. But she has just sent out 11-foot canes everywhere. So she's happy right now for sure. And yours will be very happy too, very quickly. So I'm wondering, a new garden, new space, and you've got all this wildlife. Are your rose growing practices different in this garden?
Well, I would have to say yes. First of all, when we came to this garden, I saw all the wildlife. We have bats that fly up and down the lake, lots of butterflies in this garden. So I really didn't want to do a lot of spraying with fungicides or pesticides. I knew that I didn't have space for as many roses as I had before, so I had to make my selections carefully. So it was one, I'd always been wanting to try a no spray garden. So I think this is my opportunity to try this. It's a more casual garden, so I think a no spray garden would fit into that category. I will say this though, Teresa, that sometimes in Houston, especially like after the rains that we had Hurricane Beryl in July, and then after that it rained for a whole nother week. Sometimes the black spot pressure just gets to be a lot. So I did spray at that time, but it seems like most of my roses have bounced back just fine. So I'm still working on that, but I do want to have a no spray garden. I want to try and attract as many of the beneficial insects and pollinators as I can. So
I'll be interested to hear more and more about that. I think you'll be very successful, and there's so many new things that we can do and try. So this sounds really exciting, and just another element to your rose growing experience. It's so pretty, and it's just you've chosen so well. You mentioned Savannah, which is one of my favorite right now. She's 6 foot here. I have 3 of them, and I thought, boy, I need to cut you back a little bit. But she's so beautiful. You've just really added some really spectacular roses, and I just know they're going to give you a lot of joy. And you're probably, this next season will be your 3rd year. Is that right?
Excuse me. Yes, that will be our 3rd year in the garden. So I'm looking forward to it. I'm actually looking forward to this fall when it cools off a little bit and I can take another look and reassess how everything is going to do. But I would like to say one thing, Teresa. It's been a challenge. I sometimes I get too impatient, and I have had to really be patient with this garden. One of my really big challenges with this garden has been that long white limestone bed. Sometimes I think to myself, I call it the big white monster because It's a huge bed. And half of the bed gets full sun all day long. That's where the ping lim roses are, and the South Africas, and the plum perfects. But the other half is a part that's shaded by the trees. It does get some sun, but it's not enough to grow roses. It doesn't get that 6 to 8 hours of sun to grow roses. So that's my challenge. I'm still experimenting with plant combinations on that end of the bed that will look nice with the roses, but still be balanced. And I'm going to get it, but I just keep buying new stuff and seeing what will work in there. So,
oh, I can only imagine. You know, we face west, and so we've had to have trees. And we've been here so long that some of the trees have now gotten a little too big. So we've had to do trimming. And so we have always dealt with it, too much sun or too much shade. And even in a cottage garden setting like I have a need for symmetry. And so often I've got a little walkway and I want something over here and over here, but over here, there's a tree. Over here, there's full sun. So I know exactly what you're talking about, trying to get everything to look like it all goes together. So that'll be your little challenge to work on. But year 3, you know, they're going to grow. Savannah's going to get 6 foot. So
definitely. I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to it.
Well, before I let you go, and you've been such a master rosarian and so entrenched in roses, and you've been growing for a long time, if you had to pick 3 or 4 of your very favorite roses through the years, what would they be?
Well, probably I would pick Cornelia and Climbing Pinky as climbers. I don't have either one of them now, but they've always done so well in my other garden. I also in my other garden had Mr. Lincoln, and I loved him because of the fragrance. He was a very vigorous rose. I liked, of course, Savannah. Savannah's an all-time favorite. I'm really enjoying South Africa. I really do love yellow roses. And I have a confession to make, Teresa, because I planted 3 Julia Childs in my former garden. I don't know what it was. I could never get them to do well. And South Africa just is doing so well for me right now. And another rose that I've really enjoyed growing, and I don't have it at this point in time, is called Cinco de Mayo, and it's a floribunda. It bloomed. It stayed fairly 4 feet, 4 by 4, and it just bloomed all the time in my other garden. And it was always just a really bright pop of color.
Those are good ones. Those are such good ones. Years ago, I had Julia Child, and didn't have all that much success with her. Many people do, and she is beautiful. And I've heard recently that a lot of hybridizers use Julia Child in their as one of their parents. So she has been a very successful rose in so many ways. But I don't have her either. But I have had her in the past, and she was beautiful. I always see the pictures when I'm looking back at pictures of when I think I had 3 Julia Childs in my garden, and boy, was she pretty.
Oh, definitely.
Well, Suzanne, this has been so much fun. Just thank you so much for taking the time to join me today and telling us all about your gardens. So pretty, so exciting. I'm so happy for you. And after a hard day of working in the garden, you can jump in the pool now.
You're exactly right, Teresa. And with these temperatures in Houston, you could certainly do that. Certainly.
Houses in Houston should come with pools, most likely.
A lot of them do.
I bet they do. Well, thanks so much. It was so fun to catch up and have fun in your new garden.
Well, thank you for having me. It was a pleasure to be here, Teresa.
So good. So good. Well, friends, thank you so much for being here. I hope you enjoyed today's chat and hearing about all the lovely roses that have been in Suzanne's garden or are in her new garden. So until next time, friends, do take time to smell the roses.
You've been listening to the Rose Chat Podcast with Chris VanCleave and Teresa Byington, expert rose gardeners who want to help you achieve the rose garden of your dreams. Don't miss an episode. Listen anytime on our website at rosechatpodcast.com or listen on the go via the Rose Chat app on iTunes and Stitcher Radio. Share this podcast with your social networks and join us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram by using the hashtag RoseChat. Join us next time for another edition of the Rose Chat Podcast. The Rose Chat Podcast is a production of the Rose Chat Media Group, Birmingham, Alabama.